Okay.
Go ahead. We're live.
Greetings and welcome to our monthly webinar series on the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. We're sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace. My name is Hans Meijer. The International Media Association for Peace recognizes the vital role that journalists play in guarding against totalitarianism and supporting the expansion of freedom. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media to convey accurate content, to address the challenges of our time based on the highest principles of ethical journalism, with an understanding that universal values are key elements of a world of peace. To begin our program today, let me introduce our moderator, Dr. Michael Jenkins, the president of the Universal Peace Federation International, which is our hosting organization. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Hans, and welcome to all of our viewers throughout the United States and the whole world. Our topic today is the changing landscape of social values in the Koreas. Every Tuesday, we run a very interesting program from every perspective, from the perspective of diplomacy, the academic perspective, also the political perspective, having experts on from the U.S., from the six parties. We've had ambassadors and very important people that are really guiding the development of ROK. We've had military people. So today we're looking at the scholarly and journalistic and media perspective of a changing landscape of social values in Korea. Our first speaker is Mr. Michael Downey. Michael is an author presently living in Bellingham, Washington. In addition to writing about his 21 years of living in South Korea and 10 years in Alaska, he remains active in supporting North Korean refugees and North-South Korean unification issues. Let's welcome at this time, Mr. Michael P. Downey. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Michael P. Downey. I just returned from living for 21 years in South Korea. So I have maybe a unique perspective on South Korean society and North Korean society. When I first went to South Korea, I was very interested in North-South unification issues. In particular, I was looking for what's the solution and what's the cause of the separation between North and South Korea. And I spent a lot of time working on that, and I searched for the cause of the separation in Korean history. Land, people, and ideology are three elements that have to be addressed. The land is very difficult. They control that land, and it's very difficult to go there. As an American, pretty much it's impossible for me to go there. And the people, I'll talk about that in a minute, because I did meet North Korean refugees living in South Korea. And finally, ideology. If there's going to be a unification between North and South Korea, we have to develop an ideology that embraces both North Korea and South Korea. While I was living in South Korea, I began working with a group called TNKR, Teach North Korean Refugees. It's a NGO group that really focuses on teaching English to North Korean refugees. Through this group, TNKR, I was able to meet many North Korean refugees. And I call them refugees. Some people call them defectors, but the difference is a refugee has some legal status under the United Nations conventions where if you escape from one country to a second country, that second country, if you're a refugee, that second country has to protect you and see that you get to another, a third country. That becomes very important when we're talking about the North Korean refugees. How many North Korean refugees live in South Korea today? Any guesses? The answer is there's 33,000, approximately 33,000 refugees, North Korean refugees living in South Korea. How did they get there? We have to go back to the early and mid 1990s when the economic system in North Korea collapsed. Up until that time, the North Korea was being subsidized by the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the money went away and people began to starve to death. It was a very terrible time in North Korean history where people were actually starving to death. And I've talked to quite a few North Korean refugees who remember those times very well. And especially several of them had mentioned to me that one of the most horrific memories of their life in North Korea is when the soldiers and police came and took all the village members out into the village, lined them up, and made them watch them shoot other village members. They shot them because they were gleaning food from the fields, because they were starved to death. This is the story of Hee-jong's mom. Hee-jong had a family. She had her older father and mother living with her and her children, and they were starving to death. One day she was digging an outhouse and she dug up 5 half-frozen sweet potatoes. She immediately took those sweet potatoes, 2 of them, and cooked them and fed them to her children for an unexpected dinner. The other 3 she traded to her neighbors for a half cup of cooking oil or for some other vegetables or something that she could feed to her family and trade with other people. This is the beginning of the black market in North Korea. And for a long time, the black market in North Korea sustained many of the people who, for the first time in their lives, went out and began foraging for their own food. Hee-jong's mom, as soon as she built up enough capital, she bought herself a bicycle. And together with other bicycle riders, they created the bicycle market. And they went up on the road and they set out blankets on the ground and they put their vegetables and shoes and other things that they were selling out, and people came to buy them. And they were always on the lookout for the police. And when the police came, then they hopped on their bicycles and pedaled away, and the police were at a loss. Anyway, so they, little by little, Hee-jong's mom built up her surplus, and she traded and she bartered and she sold and she fed her family, and her family survived. Hee-jong was also good at buying and selling, and she became what's known as a member of the market generation. And Hee-jong's particular product at first was hooch. Do you know hooch? Hooch is a homemade alcohol. So she would go out and find some form of fruit, mix it with sugar and copious amounts of water, and she would make alcohol and sell that alcohol. she did very well at that. And eventually, the North Korean government was against this very ideologically polluted activity of black marketing. So they decided that somebody got the bright idea that in order to put an end to this black market, then they had to devalue the North Korean won. So they devalued the North Korean won and made it worth almost nothing. The result of this was anyone in North Korea who was being paid by the government, immediately their income was lost. They had no income, and they joined the starving. The black market generation went to China because by crossing over the border into China, they were able to get their hands on hard, cold cash. And they were able to bring that hard, cold cash back into South Korea. At the same time, they were bringing back products to sell. They were bringing back clothing, this time new clothing. They were bringing back electronics like, televisions and CD players, etc., and selling them, trading them, bartering them in North Korea. This black market activity had a profound impact on its participants because for the first time, they were making their own decisions. In the past, everything was dependent, their very lives, the food that they had to eat was dependent on the North Korean government. But when they began making buy and sell decisions on their own, they experienced for the first time in their lives the feeling of freedom. And many of them got really excited about it. And it became a way of life called the Changmadang. Changmadang is market garden or the market generation. Once they began going into China, then, they realized that through the bribe, they could get to China and they could get back into South Korea. But at the same time, they realized that they could keep going. Now, most of these black market operatives were women. About 80% of those who flee North Korea are women, because the men mostly have jobs that they have to report to every day. But the women are, especially in the countryside, are housewives and agricultural workers, and so they have more time in order to participate in this black market activity. And once they got to China, many of them decided, I can keep going. I can either live in China or get out of China into South Korea. And the exodus began around 1997, large numbers, 1,000 a year, 1,500 a year began crossing over the river into China. In order to cross the river, you had to bribe the North Korean guards. And they were very susceptible to being bribed because their families were also starving. And so by paying a bribe to the border guard, they could get across into China. Once in China, most of these women refugees were in the hands of brokers. A broker is someone who's the middleman, buying and selling. What were they buying and selling? They were buying and selling human lives. Across the river in China is the northwest Chinese province of Manchuria. Manchuria is one of the poorest counties or regions in China, and many of the young women there have fled that region to other regions of China where they could make money. That leaves a lack of women in the area. So these North Korean women were viewed as a replacement for those Chinese women who had fled. So the brokers began selling them. The younger, good-looking women, they'd sell directly to the brothel. The older women, they would sell to a Chinese farmer as his second or third wife. And so these North Korean women are stuck in China. And to get out of China, to get across the border into North Korea, into China from North Korea, costs $800 to $1,000. To get out of China costs close to $2,000 because you have to hire more brokers to take you out. Fortunately, in this time in China, especially in Manchuria, there are many South Korean NGOs operating. They're mostly Christian groups, and they are seeking to assist women to get out of China. In order to get out of China, there were basically three ways to go. There was the northern route up through the Gobi Desert and into Mongolia? Yeah. But recently that route has been shut down. The other route was to go to Beijing, to one of the foreign embassies, and if they could gain entrance to a foreign embassy, then they could claim asylum and be sent to a third country. But the Chinese government began stationing large numbers of Chinese police and troops around the embassies. So that way it became blocked. The third way is the southern way, down through the southern provinces of China into Myanmar or Cambodia. From Myanmar or Cambodia, then they moved again to Thailand. The Kingdom of Thailand will repatriate North Korean refugees to South Korea. So nowadays, this is the way that most of the refugees go. Once they reach Thailand, then the Korean embassy takes over and sends them to South Korea. Once they're in South Korea, then they spend about 90 days with the South Korean National Security Police. And their story is told and retold and told again, and they're vetted. They have to make sure that their story is true. Are they really refugees? After being cleared by the Korean National Security Police, then they're passed on to a semi-government organization called Hanawa. Hanawa takes them for about 4 months and teaches them how to live in South Korean society. For example, how to use an ATM, because they don't know that in North Korea. How to get a subway, a transit card so you can ride the subway. And various other little things that you have to learn to live in South Korean society.
Thank you, Mr. Downey.
How's that?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. We've got 30 more seconds.
30 more seconds. I got a lot more to say, so I'm going to say goodbye.
It was excellent. Thank you very much, and very, very moving and also shocking. We need to understand more. But today we have several panelists, and we also have a special surprise guest. So we'd like to move on, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end. So I'd like the other panelists to Try to keep within 8 minutes if you can. Our next panelist is Dr. Maarten Meijer. Maarten has a Master's of Divinity degree from the Unification Theological Seminary and received his PhD summa cum laude from Moscow State University. He worked for 9 years in post-communist Russia and 21 years in South Korea. He has published 8 books that were translated into 9 languages. The most recent 2 were The Marriage Blessing and the Principle for Lasting Love, Good Sex and True Parenthood, and Smarter Than COVID, How South Koreans Beat the Virus. He currently teaches world religions, philosophy, and writing at Chungshim International Academy. Welcome, Dr. Maarten Meijer. You're muted.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins, for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, or if you are here in South Korea, good in the middle of the night. Very glad to be part of this forum. And without further ado, I would like to start my presentation. Which is titled Building Bonds of Jong Between South and North Korean Young People. And throughout the presentation, it will become clear what exactly this word Jong means. The father of positive psychology, Maarten wrote in his book, Learned Optimism, the society in which we live exalts the self. It takes the pleasures and pains, the successes and failures of the individual with unprecedented seriousness. This is the age of personal control. I call this new self, with its absorbing concern for its gratifications and losses, the maximized self. The waxing and waning of the self in our time coincided with the diminished sense of community and a loss of higher purpose. So this increasing self-centeredness is a worldwide trend, which also has affected South Korea. In South Korea, you have the so-called Na generation now, and Na means me or I. So this is from an earlier book that I published myself, What's So Good in Korea, Maarten, a number of years ago, but it's certainly valid today, or even more so. The explosive increase in affluence has created a culture of consumerism and materialism characterized by self-indulgent and immediate gratification. Formerly, integrity and the preservation of family harmony were priorities. Now, presenting a favored daughter with double eyelid plastic surgery as a high school graduation present may seem more urgent. Korea has cultivated its own Na generation, the Western me and X roll into one. And truly, the results of such interventions, plastic surgery, are quite stunning, as you can judge by the before and after picture over here. But the question is if that is really should be the highest values that people are aspiring for. And for men, it may be a Mercedes-Benz or a Maserati. Actually, that's the favorite car at the moment in South Korea. You probably are all familiar, or most of you, I assume, will be familiar with Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, which is usually applied to marital relationship, husband-wife, man-woman relationship, but it certainly has applications to all human relationships and also larger contexts, such as relationships between nations and peoples. So he distinguishes 5 so-called love languages: quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, receiving gifts, and acts of service. So for our purpose, I want to focus mostly on the first one and the last 2. Time spent equals love. As we spend time with the other person, we convey the message, you are important to me. I'm interested in you. I like you. It affirms that the person is okay and is wanted, and it builds a foundation of trust. So that's something that we applied when we conducted the international leadership seminars for people from the former Soviet Union, at that time still the Soviet Union. Between July 1st and August 19th, 1990, 4 separate groups of about 100 Soviet students each, 380 students in all, participated in the international leadership seminars, which were convened at the Unification Theological Seminary. And here you see, I was part of 2 of those seminars. Here you see a group photo with the professors that came to the gathering at that time. And here is the entire group with all the students. And this was fantastic. This was a profound experience of mutual exchange, of sharing of mind and heart. And these young people, professors, but especially young people, they were deeply affected and in many ways changed forever. So this is why the idea of a jong comes into play. The Korean word jong describes individual human qualities such as feeling, love, passion, heart, as well as interpersonal connections such as attachment, bond, affection. Jong is located not only inside of our hearts, but also outside between people. The concept of I is weakened for the sake of strengthening jong. In other words, the cell membrane of the self is thin enough to be permeated by jong. Jong is gradually developed over time through numerous interpersonal exchanges. The more prolonged and intensive these exchanges, the stronger and deeper jong becomes. A very, very interesting article written by Professor Christopher Jung. I highly recommend it. So people become deeply connected. There's something that changes in the minds and hearts of both, and a deep bond of trust and relationship is established. A little bit later, while I was working in Russia, we had our own, you could call them 6-party talks with participants of both Koreas, Japan, China, Russia, and America. The International Student Leadership Conference for World Peace was held in Moscow on February 12 through 14, 1984. Approximately 200 students and professors attended the conference at Moscow State University and the Diplomatic Academy. 4 professors from Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang represented North Korea. After a moving song and poem performed by the South Korean delegates, the North Korean professors came on stage embracing the South Koreans, really surprising, who in turn performed the traditional Korean sign of friendship of throwing each of the North Koreans 3 times in the air. Mind you, these are North Korean professors from Kim Il-sung University. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's very interesting. They get tossed, not just a little bit, like several meters up in the air. There they go, up in the air, the North Korean professor. So it was a wonderful experience. Here you see these 4 gentlemen seated in the front row. They look a little bit more stiff in this particular picture, but you can recognize them by the red flags on their lapels. The South Koreans, they were a little bit more loose, especially during the closing banquet. They really loved to party. And again, the connections that were made between the North Koreans, South Koreans, Americans, Russians, Americans, Chinese, and Japanese, they were deeply meaningful and really life-changing. So through a program of exchange between carefully selected schools and universities, real connections of heart can be built between young people in the South and the North. Representing the South, students from Chongshim International Academy or Sunmoon University could travel north and meet counterparts in Pyongyang, for instance, students at Pyongyang University for Foreign Studies. I mentioned Chongshim International Academy because that's the school that I work at, and the theme of the school is actually altruism. Very interesting. Other love language, thoughtful presents. Presents are visual symbols of love and friendship. The gift can be inexpensive but have high value for the receiver. But of course, we need to find out what the other person likes best or needs most. This is my own most recent book called Smarter Than COVID, How South Koreans Beat the Virus. And in this book, I refer to the current difficult situation in the North. Pyongyang's quick decision to shut the border with China may have prevented a full-fledged COVID-19 disaster, but it has come at a steep cost. In 2020, trade between North Korea and China plummeted 76%. Soybean oil, sugar, and flour are not produced in North Korea and must be imported from China, but they have not been supplied since the pandemic began. North Koreans are likely suffering from malnutrition or famine as they have in the past. So this is an incredible opportunity. Of course, it's a terrible story, but it's really an opportunity for gift giving, very much needed in the North. Last one, acts of service. Acts of service can be important to another person. This can involve asking the other person, is there something I can do for you? Help not only affects the receiver, but also the giver on a very deep level. So what can the North Koreans do? They don't have anything, but they can give of themselves. They can welcome their South Korean counterparts. For the time being, probably the North Koreans cannot travel to the South, but certainly the South Koreans will be able to travel to the North and have a profound experience. So South Koreans would have an unforgettable experience in the North where their North Korean colleagues could take them around the country, of course, carefully selected sites, and really share their minds and hearts with the South Korean students, while the North Korean students would receive gifts from the South, possibly a simple Samsung tablet or more basic necessities as requested. So for instance, during our own ILS program, with the Russian students, we all gave them a Sony Walkman, and they were so happy with that because this was the big hit item in those days. Maybe you remember, it's been a while. So maybe it would be possible to do something like that for the North Koreans. Of course, all of this will be contingent on permission of both the North and South Korean authorities, but especially because young people are so impressionable, this could over time really have a significant impact in the whole dynamic, the chemistry between the North and the South, starting with the younger generation, college educated students, high school students, and then gradually enveloping larger and larger segments of society. So since time is very limited, I will end it right here. And thank you very much for your kind attention. Maybe I should say something more.
Thank you, Maarten. Thank you very much. And we're very inspired by your presentation. It gives us a lot of information that we don't have readily available at our fingertips. And you've been there and learning so much. So we're honored to receive your presentation. This time, I'd like to present Dr. Tyler Hendricks. Dr. Hendricks was a member of the second graduating class of the Unification Theological Seminary and went on to earn his doctorate in religion at Vanderbilt. He served as the director of the Interdenominational Conferences for Clergy and the assistant director of the First Assembly of World Religions. He was president of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification in America, and then he became president of the Unification Theological Seminary. He currently is an adjunct professor at Sun Moon University and Sunhak UP Graduate University in Korea. He's the author of Family, Church, Community, and Kingdom. We're going to have a very unique perspective on family values from Dr. Hendricks. Welcome, Tyler. So happy to see you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. And I'm going to share my screen here and move quickly through my presentation as much as possible. It's a true family values strategy for Korean unification. And the first part is here, it's unity and prosperity through natural law. So true family values, and I'll describe them, can serve as a foundation for a nation's law, policy, and culture. This is a big picture presentation. Two nations whose law, policy, and culture are based on true family values will naturally harmonize. And what are the most important laws of a nation? Well, science tells us that the most important laws of a nation are the laws that protect and uphold love. What are these laws? Science tells us they're the laws of nature. Nature, for the first level, puts whole purpose above self-purpose. That's the principle of the ecosystem. So natural law tells us to put whole purpose above self-purpose, which means to put others first. So for us, human beings, the mind connects to the whole purpose, the body to the self-purpose. So the first law of nature is the body follows the mind. That is mind over body. So I call that a vertical relationship, mind-body. If the mind-body relationship is the vertical law of nature, what relationship is the horizontal law of nature? That's a male-female relationship. The male-female relationship is the horizontal law of nature. And how does this law work? Well, in the ecosystem, male and female mature, unite, multiply, nurture, and repeat. That's what happens in nature. That's how it goes. So there's you can break this down into two fundamental laws. Number one, nature puts mature first before unite and multiply. Number two, nature has parents nurture until their offspring reach maturity, which means they could survive to multiply on their own. Apply this to human life. Mature first means sexual abstinence until marriage. Nurture offspring means sustain the two-parent household, which means faithful marriage. So the horizontal laws of nature are sexual abstinence until marriage and absolute fidelity in marriage. And science proves that nations that follow these laws multiply and thrive, and nations that violate these laws suffer and disappear. The vertical law addresses us as mind-body individuals. Live for others is the individual principle. An individual creates what? A life. The horizontal law addresses us as male and female couple. Maturity and fidelity are social principles. A couple creates a family. Society comes from men and women creating families. Aristotle said, the family contains the original sources of constitutional government. Confucius said, peace in the family leads to peace in the nation. So there's East and West agree about the connection between the family and the nation. So the hypothesis to be tested here is sexual abstinence before marriage and fidelity in marriage are the most important laws of a nation. In other words, a healthy nation starts with natural law, purity and fidelity, sexual abstinence until marriage, eternal commitment in marriage. Does social science back this up? It absolutely does. Here is what happens when we violate these natural laws. And I have a whole, you can go on and on about the research that's been done by social science in terms of the violation of these natural laws. Poorer, and I mentioned the universities here, the poorer health, major depression, alcohol dependence, drug abuse, depression, anxiety, withdrawal, suicidal thoughts, problems for your children, heart attacks, PTSD, fighting, bullying, vandalism, go on and on and on. When we violate these natural laws, the society falls apart. And I'll get into some. Okay, so what happens is family breakdown is like a knife with two blades. Taxpayers cover the social cost, and the recipients of the services rarely, if ever, repay the cost. So you've got a higher social cost, smaller tax base, and a moral crisis becomes an economic catastrophe. So you've maybe heard of the book Sex and Culture by J.D. Unwin, a young British anthropologist who's tested Freud's criticism of sexual repression. To his surprise, he found that cultural anthropology disproves Freud. For society, sexual repression, quote unquote, is totally beneficial. In the book Sex and Culture, he presented his analysis of 86 cultures. He found that cultures that allow divorce decline slowly, gradually allow free sex, and then decline rapidly. On the other hand, cultures that practice absolute monogamy and forbid divorce expand and prosper. So he said, you can have one or the other, great energy or sexual freedom. You cannot do both for more than one generation. How come? Because such a culture is violating the laws of nature. So how are the governments of the two Koreas doing in this area? In a word, neither are doing very well. North Korea, corruption at the top. The Kipum-jo, pleasure squad, began during the reign of Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong-il's unrestricted sexual behavior was highly contagious. This is from research on the internet. Since that era, adultery, premarital sex, cohabitation have become more prevalent among ordinary young people of North Korea. Handpicked harem inside Kim Jong-un's vile pleasure squad. This is from England. We're running out of time. I'm sorry, are we running out of?
Continue.
Okay, well.
5 more minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, there's the problems with sexual morality, and even the North Korean Workers' Party is largely hands-off. Same problem in South Korea. Pornography, digital sex crimes, abortion, divorce, the fertility is plummeting. People aren't having children. More than half of all the homicide victims in South Korea are women. One of the highest murder rates of women in the world in South Korea. Same things happened in America. Reverend Moon saw this years ago. People would rather not get married, live in an apartment, enjoy sensual games. They don't care about their nation, ready to sell it out at any time. This is South Korea. And this is not just Korea. All governments are dealing with these problems. The path forward is to follow the science, follow the natural law, move in the direction of sexual purity and marital fidelity. So what are the action steps for a government? The action steps are pure love education, which means you educate your young people to be sexual abstinent until marriage. True love family movement, which is be faithful in marriage. And this model can be adjusted for each nation. Work in the North and South would follow different paths to meet in the middle. Basic action step. And this is a photo from, I believe it's from Robert Kittle. I believe it's Thailand. I'm not totally sure. Where married couples are rededicating themselves to fidelity. So the government officially adopts pure love education for its youth and promotes the interfaith peace marriage blessing for all citizens. I'm sorry I can't get to my my animations option here because it's not as clear as it should be. But anyway, the government has soft leverage points to move in this direction. Any government, marriage and divorce laws, public school curricula, media support, public health policies, think of COVID-19, apply it to these moral values, social welfare, tax incentives. So you work with all religions and with the party. Every religion supports sexual purity and faithful marriage. Conscientious leaders of all parties support them. I underline conscientious. Values education in schools. Principles of pure love and marital fidelity expressed according to the national culture and traditions. Work within the nation's system. Work within the government's existing laws and offices. Bless the leaders in marriage Find those leaders who uphold these values, and they will bless the nation. Public ceremonies and holidays, national holidays honoring sexual purity. Merit. This again, I think this is the Thailand or Cambodia. Pure love pledge of young people. I will be pure until I get married. And research shows also that faithful married couples have much better sex than single people, who are playing around. Interfaith peace, marriage, blessing, exchange marriage. This is interesting. How did the tribalism of Great Britain break down? I'll just finish with this and we're done. According to scholars, the tribalism a millennium ago in Great Britain broke down how? It broke down how by the Christian ban on cousin marriage that extended to 6 cousins. This edict forced people to marry across tribal lines, thus blurring and ultimately dissolving sectarian divisions. This paved the way for a new historical trajectory. So that's what our movement is doing, the True Family Values movement. Tribalism breaks down because of exchange marriage. Black, white, North, South Korea. You get it? The idea is that on this very fundamental level, following natural law, we can reform North Korea, reform South Korea, and 2 reformed nations together can harmonize. This is the underlying foundation for the political and economic developments that need to take place. But we need a moral foundation in a personal level in each person's life and in the culture to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hendricks. What an excellent, excellent overview of cultural values and how that affects the nation and even the world. I'm very happy to have Dr. Hendricks with us today. I'm a colleague of his for many, many years, and he's an author and a scholar, and he's broadcasting from Korea right now. So thank you very much, Dr. Hendricks. We do have a special guest today, and I'm hoping there'll be enough time to hear her and then come back and have a brief exchange between the panelists. Also, I want to mention that Mr. Michael Downey's got a new book out called Between Heaven and Earth. It's on Amazon right now. But we have a special guest here today, and her name is Chun-Young Ju. Miss Ju is a refugee from North Korea, and she's put in our chat box her Google Doc, which you can access now, and it's a beautiful, beautiful testimony of her story, and it's very, very moving. But Chun-Young, we'd like you to come and join us at this time. If you could spotlight her screen, EJ, and we'd like to meet you and support you. We're grateful that you're developing your life in South Korea. Chun-Young, would you like to join us now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Okay.
We hear you. You can come just by voice if you prefer.
Oh,
So-
thank you. Yes, this Korea is very early morning. Here is
Oh, sorry. Yes.
almost 4 a.m. So I have baby, my mom, and my family. So I have not that big house in South Korea, in Seoul. It's really expensive. Anyway, so please understand. I'm gonna just only use my voice.
Okay, very good. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My English also is really short. So Michael Downey was my English coach when he was in here in Seoul, South Korea. So yeah, if you have question, I want to try to answer.
Okay, my first question is, what was it like growing up in North Korea? You left in 2010. So how was it to grow up in North Korea? Tell us a little bit about your experience with your family.
Yes. I was born in 1991. So, at that time, near the Soviet Union also collapsed. So, I was born that time, and also North Korea has a big famine, and also the public ration North Korea has rationing system, but also stopped at not in after 1990. So I had really hard time, but my father, he's really smart, I think. So he and my family moved to very small city, and then I growing up there, and then my father bought some small radio through the black market. So North Korea has these days, after 2003, they have market system called 장마당, but 장마당 is just showing 장마당, but under there have black market system. So we bought a radio or American movie or South Korean movie through the black market. So when I was 9 years old, I listened to the overseas radio, like a Voice of America, Radio Free Asia from Washington, D.C., and also gospel radio called FEBC. So that kind of
Amazing.
signals, yes,
Yes.
there was. So I was really blessed, and
Yes.
yeah, lucky. So our family woke up from the North Korean, what how to say, from the brainwashing. Our family, whole family, wake up from there. So my father first escaped in 2008, and then 1 year later, my mom and two siblings also escaped. And then after 3 years, because I have dangerous time in North Korea, but dollar has power, American dollar. So my father, he after escaped in North Korea, and then he living in South Korea, and then he earned a lot of money, and then he changed the dollar, and then he sent me. So I bribed the dollar to around, like North Korean police, something like this. So dollar protected me, and then after 3 years, I prepared again, and then escaped from North Korea. But at that time, North Korean border guard, is it right? Police, North Korean border guard between Chinese and North Korea. Between the border is river. So the river name is Tuman River. So North Korean border guard, they helped me because they received money from my father. So yeah, they helped my swam, yeah, and everything. So after cross the Tuman River, and then I met Chinese broker. But after 3 days, I arrested by Chinese police. But a lot of Christians and Christian groups in South Korea and America, and also other NGOs, they gathered money and prayed for me. So I escaped from Chinese police also. So after that, I through the Laos and Thailand, and then finally I arrived in South Korea, and I met my whole family. So
Oh, how wonderful. Wonderful. Amazing.
thank you.
Well, Chanyang, we're we're also looking on the screen at your beautiful testimony. And this is
Thank you.
available in the chat, everyone. You can download it from the chat. It's a
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful testimony. And we're so fortunate to have you share with us today, Chanyang. And
Thank you
we're
so much.
very grateful that somehow through some of the NGOs and your work of your father, you were able to come out of Chinese prison and eventually return back to your family or be
Yes.
brought to your family in South Korea. This is a miracle. So we're very grateful
Right.
for you being here and we really honor you. And we still have a couple more minutes. So I'd like to ask, if you don't mind, our panelists can share something for your final remarks and maybe even comment about Chanyang's sharing with us. I really want to thank you for inviting Chanyang, Mr. Downey, and we're very, very grateful. And we would like to do more, but we're also sensitive to the fact that many times the refugees do not want to be publicly recognized or brought before the public. So we respect that too. We are looking for the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. We believe that when people really can see the truth, and then also when nations help one another and dialogue, we can see a breakthrough come. That's why when Father and Mother Moon went to North Korea, they met Kim Il-sung. Wasn't simple because Kim Il-sung had sent 25 assassins to South Korea to eliminate Reverend Moon because he had developed a huge media foundation in the world and especially in America. And it was, he was seen as the #1 anti-communist. But Father and Mother Moon's idea is not to destroy or overcome the enemy with force. The idea is that let's help the enemy also be liberated from the ideas that don't work for government and don't work for freedom. And somehow Kim Il-sung and Father and Mother Moon had a meeting in 1991, and it was a profound, it was 30 years ago this November. And it was a profound meeting. Somehow there was some connection of heart where they really could see that Father and Mother Moon really genuinely wanted to help the people of North Korea, all people, and didn't want to destroy everyone or destroy the North. And because of that, that friendship passed on all the way to Kim Jong-un. Not friendship, but communication, respectful communication. So that's what our program always emphasizes too. We must stand up for what's right. So our panelists, I'd like to start with Dr. Hendricks, if you could give some final comments, and then we'll come to Maarten and then to Mr. Downey.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was going to get to that meeting, but even though the unification, position, Reverend Moon and Mrs. Moon are very strongly anti-communist, but because of that meeting of minds and hearts that they had that December in 1991, the communist government in North Korea and the anti-communist unification movement could actually work together on a lot of economic projects for the benefit of North Korea and South Korea. So this is a good example of the meeting of minds and hearts, that we don't want to threaten. We don't want to be a threat. We want to show a path for development, and that the lead, and in a way, North Korea, because it is this kind of totalitarian state, if the government gets the right idea, they can move much more quickly in a positive direction of true freedom, of true family values, and that changes everything. So, and in fact, I understand, and I'll close with this, that in 1992, we did a large exchange marriage celebration in Seoul, but actually Father Moon wanted to do it, and Kim Il-sung was willing to house it in North Korea. But the South Korean government would not agree with that. It just shows that things could happen very quickly. Very
good.
One
Very good.
can break through with these values. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Meijer?
Yes, I think that it's obvious that what we need a different kind of interaction between the South and the North, because even recently we had new missile launches, missile tests, both in the North and in the South. And this is clearly not getting us anywhere. It's simply an escalation, confrontational approach. We can have more sanctions and more rockets and more barriers, and that's not going to solve the problem. What we really need is what Professor Joseph Nye once called soft power. And that really has to come through direct human interaction, human relationship. My proposal is just one, a very, very small aspect of that, what can be done in the context of exchanges between young people, between North and South. And there are very many different other approaches through culture exchanges and so forth and so on. And of course, as Dr. Hendricks said, ultimately through intermarriage between the North and the South, that would really be at the most profound level. But this is really the route we have to go, and not just by getting bigger guns, but by sharing hearts and minds with each other, finding possible realistic contexts through which this can really take place. That's our challenge.
Thank you, Maarten. How about Michael?
I'd just like to say thank you very much to Chanyang Ju for joining us. You know, it's not easy. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and she has a family that's in the house with her. And anyway, thank you, Chanyang. And for me, I mentioned earlier that 3 important aspects were land, people, and ideology. So I'm really happy to hear people working on some ideological framework that can possibly unite North and South Korea together. I know UPF, we listened to Dr. Hendricks today, but also UPF Korea has a slide presentation also about the ideology needed to unite North and South Korea together. So
very good, very good.
Thank you, everyone.
Ms. Ju, we'd like to hear your final remarks. We understand that you are a Christian, and many of us here are Christians, but we're also respecting all people. We love Jesus. Thank you. Please give us your final remarks.
Oh, wow, amazing. Thank you so much. And yes, you know, these days, a lot of miracle things inside North Korea. So, you know, North Korean refugees like me, I believe Jesus. So like my family and other North Korean refugee friends, if they believe Jesus, they, you know, sharing gospel to North Korea, inside North Korea. So North Korean families, they use South Korean cell phone. So, you know, secretly, we can, for us, it's not secretly, but North Koreans use secretly, you know, the cell phone. So, you know, these days, many North Korean people, they believe God, you know, not Kim dictators. So under you know, underground Christians in North Korea, you know, they got working in North Korea. So, you know,
very
it's amazing. So pray for me. I pray for me and pray for North Korea and North Koreans inside North Koreans. So
we will pray for you.
Praying.
We will pray for you.
Thank you
this
so
is
much.
a wonderful. Chanyang, this is wonderful. Mother Moon, our founder, came from Anju, and she was part of a Pentecostal Christian foundation with her grandmother and mother. And because of the religious persecution, right before the Korean War, she escaped to the South, but she can never forget. We always know that the fire is burning very bright within the hearts of Christian people who are underground, and they really want to, you know, see all people become free and be able to follow their faith. So thank you. This is a most wonderful session. Hans, thank you very much. we'll turn it back to you for your final closing. And thank you, everyone. This is a great, great session. Ms. Jew especially, we support you and let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, our presenters and our special guests. Dr. Jenkins, thank you for guiding us in our conversation today. And we look forward to another exciting program next month, the last Tuesday of every month. And please pray for the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Also, there's many prestigious people who are on the line today. I see Dr. Chung from Canada, a very famous scholar, and many, many, many others. So I thank you all. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Tuesday with our special Washington brief. We're going to have Andy Kim, who is a very expert person on North Korea, South Korea, and he was the one that went with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo 3 times to Pyongyang to meet Kim Il-sung. Next Tuesday at 2. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Jew. God bless.